So let's get Robert LaCosse up here. He's a really good friend of mine. He works at Intel, but he's also the biggest gamer I know. And I have to deal with him texting me gaming stuff all the time. So here we go. Let's get started, you guys.
Thanks, Kirsten. So, I'm here not only because I share Kirsten's affinity for, but because, so games are my life's work, straight up. That's it. And we're here because we've been playing games as a species for thousands of years, probably longer than we think. And gameplay correlates to available energy, and with available energy comes available time. And what do we use that available time for? We use it for entertainment. Entertainment being defined as gameplay. So, we want to get insight right here, right now, into what the future of gameplay looks like. And how is Portland's industrial production, creative production capacity going to support this future? So, I think without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Let's start off with, and here's what the notes are for. Okay, Brian Jameson from Jump Drive Studios, come on up. Brian, would you like to... Actually, here, why don't we get everyone up and then we'll pass the mic around. And next up we have Paul Culp from Super Genius. And Yuri, you're going to have to help me out here. Yuri Kvichko from Sleep Ninja. And one Nick Lambert from Mountain Machine Studios. Here, shall we pass the mic down and introduce ourselves? And here, wait. Let's do this. We'll pass the mic down, introduce ourselves, and then they'll get their seat of their choice.
I was going to recommend maybe, single-handed fight for the best. Make it.
We're game developers.
We're game developers, yeah, okay. So I'm Brian Jameson. I started making shareware games when I was a teenager, really bad ones. And I founded Jump Drive Studios. We're working on a game called XO, which is a game that kind of puts you in the chair of an admiral's seat and you get to save humanity. That's kind of what I'm doing.
I'm Paul Culp. I run a studio called Super Genius. We're a video game developer support studio in Oregon City. About 30 employees. We're growing pretty quickly. Been doing this since 1995. Is that better? There you go. Intimate. So I've been doing this since 1995. Started off at a small game developer in San Francisco called Blam. We were doing a Zelda clone called Monkey Hero. Was there for 5 years and then broke off and started what I consider one of the first art outsourcing studios in the U.S. In 2000 called Liquid Development, which is still around. They're just downtown here. And then in 2008, I started Super Genius, which was a division of a film company called Funnelbox. We grew the studio inside Funnelbox and eventually outgrew them and bought the studio in 2012. And happily ever after.
Hey everyone, my name's Yuri, and I'm been kind of a game developer since I was probably really young, but I never really grew into calling myself a game developer until just the last couple of years. Sort of a programmer, kind of security guy, all over the map until about 3 years ago. I moved to Portland from New Jersey, and I sort of found the local game development community here, which really sort of allowed me to embrace myself as a game developer as opposed to just somebody who did games on the side. And made a couple of little-known games you probably wouldn't have heard of until finally I had a little bit more success with Sleep Ninja Games, which is the studio that I'm currently part of. We made a game called Monsters Ate My Birthday Cake. Hopefully some of you heard of it. And it was published by Cartoon Network last year. And kind of off of the success of that and off of the relationships we built off of that, we were able to kind of form a full-time studio. It's just the three of us with a couple of other people helping out here in Portland, working on our next game, doing a little bit of contract work to fund the whole thing. But yeah, we're having a lot of fun doing it, and I'm just kind of lucky that I can do it full-time and be able to call myself a game developer.
My name is Nick Lambert, and I co-founded Mountain Machine Studios here in Portland. And my journalism and theater degrees obviously led to making games. And I did a few years of construction and music in between there. And I really wanted to make music for games, and so I formed a company with family, my brother and a couple of my cousins, and we are Mountain Machine Studios. We made a game with Daniel H. Wilson, a local author here in town who wrote the Robopocalypse series, called Mayday Deep Space, and it's a fully voice-activated game on iPhones. And then we just put out a game called Change Wizard, where you can live out your dream of being a cashier, drawing change for customers. So, thank you.
All right, let's give it up for our panelists. Kirsten, do I not have a seat?
We're good.
Okay. Cool. I'm cool here. Okay, I guess first question, we're just going to warm these panelists up with a few softballs. So, first question. I mean, Nick, you started to touch upon this. So, how does one get into game design / game development? What is it? Where was your calling? Did you have an epiphany moment? Like, oh, I should really be doing games right now.
For us, I had started a scoring studio here in town when I moved here from Seattle with my friend, and we wanted to make music for video games, and then we got a project, and we spent about 4 months working on music and sounds for it, and the company then just disappeared, and we never heard from them again. And so we were like, well, that sucks. So I guess we'll just make our own game company so we can always be making music for games. And I tricked my brother and my cousins to quit their jobs that made money and come and do this with me. And we learned from the ground up how to become a business and how to pay bills making something that we love doing.
So for me, getting into games was kind of a long process because I've been doing games-related things, sort of like mods on existing games or custom maps for existing games, probably since as long as I can remember starting to program.
Can you define custom maps for us?
Sure. So there's a lot of games out there that will give you flexibility in taking what they've already made and kind of expanding on it. So sort of building within their world or within their engine. One example that was really big and informative for me was Warcraft 3 from Blizzard Entertainment. They had a really well-refined engine where you could go in and just create your own sort of little levels and little entirely unique experiences using assets and code and everything else that they had. So that was sort of how I got my start. As well as kind of like a college course that really taught me a lot of the basics. But I would say that the most important thing for me was I'm a programmer, and I'm sort of a programmer and no other skills. I have no art skills, I have no music skills, I have no, that's it, that's all I got. That's all I bring to the table. And so for me it was finding a community where I could partner with people and kind of make their dreams a possibility or make their creations a possibility. And that's sort of where I get a lot of my drive, especially in games, is taking somebody's vision and kind of bringing that to life. So for me, it was all about finding the right community where I could find the people that I could depend on and partner with and make the kind of things that I think should be out there.
Actually, you've touched upon a really interesting point, too, that I didn't introduce with Nick. What's your job title? How do you self-identify? So you would be a game developer?
So I use the term developer as a sort of catch-all just because I am somebody who participates in the process of developing games, but that can really mean just about anything. If somebody asks for more specifics, somebody kind of goes past the barrier of interest of, beyond just you make games, then I tell them that I'm a game programmer, and then I do a lot of the lower level design. So, for example, I'm not necessarily great at the higher level, kind of one big game idea, but I'm really interested in tweaking the little mechanical things that make a game really just feel right. That's kind of where my forte is.
Fantastic. And to backtrack, Nick, how do you self-identify? What's your job title?
I guess now I originally started out as just the sound and story guy. And then we were in the first class for organ storyboard. And after kind of learning that, being a bunch of friends making something cool isn't really a business, and becoming one, I eventually had to transition into more of a CEO position, and I needed to pull myself back a little bit from what I was doing and try and actually make us so that we could pay our next rent.
The cracker of whips,
yeah.
The herder of cats.
So, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cat herder. So.
Right. Yeah. And on to Mr. Paul Culp.
All right, what was the question?
Question number 1. How did you get into game design? And number 2, what's your job title? How do you self-identify?
Okay. Well, game design wasn't really a thing in the 90s, or the early 90s, at least that I knew of. I grew up in the Bay Area in a small town a couple hours south of San Francisco. I could draw before I could walk, and it was a small town, so by the time I was 13 and 14, I was doing all the business cards for all the businesses and painting holiday windows at the barber shop sort of thing, and doing logos for, like the pharmacy down the street.
You had a way cooler job than me.
Well, I got paid in, like $10 for a logo, and I thought that was the greatest thing ever. It was never a question of what I was going to do with my life. I was always going to be an artist, right? So at some point I found myself into web back in 93, 94, learned HTML. Not a programmer, I was horrible at it, but I could design stuff, and I really enjoyed that. I did have some friends who ran a company called Blam, the game developer in San Francisco I talked about earlier. And we were friends, and we had talked about doing stuff together. They were working on a game. They just got $1 million contract with a company called BMG, which is now Take-Two. And
I want to give that a round of applause.
For BMG or Take-Two?
For the $1 million contract?
Okay, yeah. That was cool. So we're a bunch of 22, 23-year-old kids, or they were 23. I would think I was 20 at the time. Kids with $1 million contract, so it was kind of a big deal. So I wasn't on board yet, but Modern English happened to be playing at the bar below Blam. It was in this old Victorian off Lombard Street. And so Modern English was there, and we were like, let's go check out Modern English. And I ran into my friends there, and their studio, the developer, was just upstairs. And so we watched the show, got pretty loaded, had a really good time, and then me and the CEO went upstairs to smoke a joint. And he showed me all of his concepts, and so we spent about 3 hours going over, the concept art for the game. And he was like, "Hey, you draw, don't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I can draw." And so I ended up doing a test for him right there, and I sketched the main character from the game. And he was like, "That's brilliant, you're hired." And 2 days later, I showed up there at 9:30 in the morning and started working. So I came on as a concept artist at that point. I was a small developer, and eventually I worked my way up to art director. But that's a whole other story. But yeah, it was chance, luck, and a little bit of talent.
So art director is how you self-identify right now?
No. There's in the art field, I'm smoked by all the younger kids. I had to get out of that. That's why I'm the CEO now. But I do self-identify as a game developer, and that's pretty much the catch-all for
fantastic.
What we do.
Thank you. And all right, without further ado, we're on to Brian Jameson of Jump Drive Studios.
Hello. So I don't know. I got my start making games, like board games, when I was a kid in junior high school and making game systems. And then I started writing the aforementioned crappy shareware games. And I was sort of like a software mechanic. I would go to people's houses and fix their computers, and they would pay me money. And I was doing pretty well with that, and then we met some people in a hot tub. And
Like we meet all folks.
yeah, and they
Business associates.
yeah, so they ended up being big in the advertising agency that was working with the Sony PlayStation launch. So we ended up pitching and winning the launch of the Sony PlayStation website, which was a really cool, fun project to do, and kind of parlayed that into working with Sony to make web games to promote their console games, and then ended up working with Namco and DreamWorks Games and Atari Midway and that kind of thing, making web games. And that was really fun. I really super enjoyed that, but I wanted to do bigger games, so we ended up using the really super smart people, way smarter than me, to build a prototype of an MMO, a massive multiplayer game, which we pitched and fought and battled with and finally launched in '97, one of the first-ish MMOs to come out, which ran for like almost 10 years. And then in between that, I ran some other different kind of companies. I did some stuff in biodiesel and green building, and most recently in open source. And then kind of really realized that my true calling is in games, so that's why I'm back doing what I'm doing with Jump Drive.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And you would self-identify as?
I don't know. It's so hard to say. With a small team, there's 5 full-time people on our team, so we're really, really tiny. So, you know, I do a lot of things. I've run a lot of software teams, so one hat is producer. I'm the art director because we can't afford a real art director. And I don't know, I water the plants, So, so I think I call myself a founder. We're not big enough to go any bigger
Founder
than that.
/ principal investor.
Something like that, yeah.
Mailroom clerk to project
Clerk,
manager.
janitor. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Thanks, everyone, for the intros. So let's get down to it, because we're talking about the future here, right? Right? Or something. I don't know. I'm here for the drinks. No, really. Okay, so let's talk about trends in games. And we can start this from, I outlined before 3 possible areas where we could start from. Technology, style of play, and interval of play. How about technology? Do you want to start from technology?
That'd be this guy's field.
Okay, yeah. Let's pick on Yuri.
Sure. So as far as technology, well, might as well mention the kind of buzzwords, right? VR, sort of the big buzzword right now. We've got the Oculus Rift. We've got the, oh goodness, what's the Samsung one? Gear VR. Then there's the Sony prototype that just came out. Steam's doing its own thing, so it seems like everyone's jumping into VR. There's also the HoloLens, as well as one that just sounds like magic hand waving for now, but that's mostly because they're kind of keeping things under wraps. Do you remember what that one's called? It was also sort of like HoloLens, visual light projection. Giant Leap? No,
It's not Meta, is it?
it might have been Giant Leap. Magic Leap, that's the one,
yeah.
Magic Leap. So there's all sorts of new emerging technologies in that, which are interesting. To me as a game developer, I've done one game, or I've done kind of 1.5 games in Oculus Rift personally. They were that was the easiest platform to develop and the cheapest one to kind of get access to, although this was before Gear VR, so maybe that's kind of changed things a little bit. And for me, I still think as a game developer, I still don't think I'd consider the platform just yet. For example, there's too many of them are still sort of in the beta prototype phase. Too many of them are just dev kits and not yet commercial. And so far, I haven't seen any of them solve the really big problem in VR for me, which is people simply get nauseous from virtual reality hardware. It's just a fact. Some people are more sensitive to it. Some people are less sensitive to it. And I actually saw I saw a radio podcast episode that talked about something totally unrelated, but they were talking about how we get used to technology. And this is somebody talking about the elevator, right? Eventually, we sort of just got used to the elevator as a society. We no longer have to worry about whether this gigantic machine that brings us up and down is going to break. We no longer need an elevator.
People used to get nauseous on elevators all the time?
Well, it wasn't a nauseous thing, but it was a fear thing. They were just afraid of this thing, and then as people grew up with it, it became normal. So I suspect VR is going to be one of those things that once it becomes popular enough, it's going to take a generation before we're all used to it. And so for me, right now, I don't really see that much in VR. There's going to be specialized uses that are going to be amazing. There are going to be specialized demo, and there's going to be a kind of hardcore following of consumers who really love the platform and really devote themselves to the platform. But I don't see it as a sort of mass market until I think at least one generation sort of passes and they grow up with VR and have a chance to kind of get used to that.
But therein, I think we have a fascinating takeaway in that back when the elevator was innovated, yes, we had a generation to get used to it. Now, well, let's see, we've gone from prototype VR in the early 2000s, and we'll be at fully fledged room projection plus VR goggles by 2025, 2030. So that's much less than a generation than what comes after. So we don't necessarily have the biological time to get used to it.
Yeah, for all we know, the problems will be fixed before a generation even passes, and we might move on to something totally new.
Booyah. Yeah. Okay, so actually that illuminated a lot of the future tech associated with device and screen. I've also got two other categories which I would be happy to have your input on. Computational capacity and network factors. Do we have any takers?
No.
As soon as Google Fiber gets in, the network stuff gets a little bit easier. But it's just as internet speeds get faster, the network stuff gets better. So it's a fairly simple solution. It's just convincing the internet providers that we need faster speeds. Like just do it. You can. It's not that hard. So.
Good question. So, net neutrality / municipal internet. Good for games, bad for games. What do we think? Where's the game stance on those?
I think most game developers I know are all for net neutrality.
Absolutely.
It's pretty universal.
Round of applause for net neutrality. Booyah!
I would like to go back to the technology trends. Like I've been going to GDC and E3 for a while now, and every GDC, it's like everyone's like running around with their hands in the air going, oh my God! Like 2008, 2009, it was like Facebook games. Everyone's got to be on Facebook games. And Zynga's going to kill us all. And people are panicking, you know. And then after that, it was like the very next year, it was mobile because finally, you know, like the iOS market was saturated with casual games. And it was casual, and everyone freaking out trying to get, you know, like, how do we get moms into this? Like, we got to capture the mom market. And people are literally losing their shit every single year. And then it was free-to-play. Like, if you weren't free-to-play, you were smoked. And, like, you got to be free-to-play. And everyone's talking about free-to-play. Games as a service. Every meeting I had was games as a service. And it's hysteria. And then this last year, it was, VR. Oculus. You got to be on Oculus. We're not on Oculus. Like, we're going to die. And it's really that intense every single year. And then next year, it's going to be something else. I don't know what it's going to be, but
hopefully premium
it's gonna
price
be
games, right?
Every one of those things that happened, though, it was good. It wasn't a revolution. Like Facebook games, social network games. Yeah, they're here. They're not taking over everything, but they're here, and they're comfortable, and they're fun. Mobile casual games are here. They're comfortable. They're fun. It's not the end-all, be-all. Just like free-to-play is good for some games and not for other games. And now people are going back to the retail model because they realize free-to-play isn't taking over everything. Same thing with VR right now. I think it's new and people are freaking out and they have to be with VR. I think in the next 10 years you're going to have some very interesting things happen with VR, and it's going to be its own thing. But not everyone wants to put the stupid goggles on and be in their little VR environment. It's going to be another subset of gaming. It's going to be comfortable. It's going to make money. It's going to do really well. But none of those things, I think, are going to saturate everything and destroy everything in its wake. So
I think you need the developers that want to follow the trends, though, like to push whatever that market is. But I feel
Absolutely.
that there needs to be also the companies that just, like, I assume that we're all this way, where it's like we're working on and making the games that we actually want to play ourselves. And whether that falls into a Facebook game or a free-to-play game, then that's fine. I mean, it's just you're making what you want to be playing. And I mean, we made Change Wizard, and it's definitely not like a runaway hit by any means, but it's something fun that we got a kick out of and that cracked us up, and we put it out there. But then you need those free-to-play people because they need to be pushing that market as far as it can go, because sometimes those end up being something good in the end.
absolutely, yeah.
And there's tons of shit in there, but I mean, there's a few good
there's
ones
very
in
good
there.
stuff,
So,
yeah.
but yeah.
But again,
but
it's
I
not
agree with
wiping
you.
out everyone
Yeah.
else. It's just its thing, and it's
Yeah.
a good
Yeah,
thing.
I think that the point of it for a small development studio like ours is that it gives us choice. And we're not limited to the way it used to be. And the way it used to be was there were just a few things, and you had to go through very structured ways to get approved and get in, and it was really quite difficult. But now, with a small group of people, you can make the game that you believe in and choose the technology that fits the right market and the right game. And there are so many choices now, and it's so easy to get on those platforms. Just the possibilities are amazing. And I like our game, single player, PC, Mac, Linux. It's not any of that. It's, arguably no sex appeal at all, right? There's no augmented reality. We don't have VR. But it's, there's a massive market for that. And we'd be able to hit that. And taking nothing away from those games that do the augmented reality or the virtual reality. That's awesome. That's great. But not for our game. And it's that choice that I feel like is really the most exciting thing about all these technologies that are coming out.
I think I can speak a little bit to what Brian's saying too, and this is a little bit tangential, but really, really important, especially with kind of emerging technologies and developers being able to make the thing that they want to do. Sort of the big movement maker, I feel like, in the industry, and then anybody can feel free to disagree with me, has been Unity 3D. So Unity 3D, just to give you a quick intro, is a game engine, and it's a game engine that most of its power is in its cross-platform compatibility. So you can take Unity 3D and you can build a game once, and then you can release it on mobile, you can release it on desktop, you can release it on just about every single console. They now have you can release it on PSP, so it's on handheld devices. They just recently announced that you can release it on the DS, which is really, really exciting because that's something we've wanted to develop for. And what's really nice about having this one engine that's kind of taken over the industry to the percentage of, I think, 60 or 70% of the industry is now using Unity 3D, is that every one of these emerging technologies, the very first thing that they do is that they write a plugin for Unity. So if you're already using Unity, oftentimes you get these kind of new amazing technologies for free. So I developed a game for the last Game Jam, which is just kind of like do a game in 48 hours. I developed a game, and it wasn't intended to be a virtual reality experience by any means, but then I realized that my control scheme could be within an hour mapped to VR, and I just did it. And it took me about an hour to just throw in the code provided by Oculus to turn a game that otherwise would never be VR into a VR experience that was really interesting, just to sort of see what it would be like in that way. So I think the options and the barriers to going into those new technologies are really, really quickly crumbling. So you don't have to get nearly as invested in this new tech as you might have used to be, where stuff was hard to support. You had to write a custom engine and custom code to support the stuff. You had to implement DLLs. All this work, from 5 or 10 years ago that now is just, 1 hour in a game jam.
It used to take a day to make a button. I mean, it's been enormously transformative to to what you can do to make games. And we're using Unity 3D for our game too. And it's, I've had to write them from scratch before, and it would never go back.
Access has changed everything. It's that's probably the most exciting thing that's happened in the game industry in the last 5 years is access and indies. There used to be people guarding the gate, like you had to be with the Sonys and with the EAs. You had to have a multi-million-dollar budget. You had to buy a $10,000 dev kit, and now the software is falling into the hands of everyone. So people are free to experiment and make incredible things, and it's elevated games from the argument over whether or not it's art or technology. That was a huge argument in the 90s. I don't know if it still is, but now it is art. It's pop art. It's absolutely art. There's no question about it because people are expressing themselves with these games. So access has changed absolutely everything.
And there's free courses online for any of you out there that want to learn to make a game or use Unity. I mean, there's free courses everywhere. And it's awesome. I feel like part of it, sorry, I know you have other questions, but
go with.
Some people get I think some people get a little scared of oversaturation of a market, and making it open to everybody means anybody can make a game, and there's all the crap. But at the same time, if you're really wanting to make a good game, then you're going to put the time in to rise above all that. And it sounds pretty cliche, but it's really true. It's just all that stuff is great because you know what's working, you know what's not working, and you know what to aim for, and you can overachieve by seeing what other people have already done, within that same genre that you're working on. But it's awesome. If you want to make games, you can do it now.
Yeah, the technology. It's like we have, for relatively cheaply, we can go out and buy enough equipment to make a movie, like a pro ball movie, right? Yeah. That doesn't mean that there's no more good movies because the world is saturated with indies making stupid movies. The tool is pointless. That once the tool goes away, then you have people. The good stuff rises to the top, and I heard that throughout the industry. People were really afraid that it was going to become so saturated with crap because everyone was going to be making stuff, and it's just the worst argument ever. Tools are tools, and as soon as they're made available, the artists are going to come out, and that's always a good thing.
Oh, and this, I have a bunch of questions around this topic. So just real quick, use one hand. How many people does it take to make a game? Woo-hoo-hoo. One all around.
If I'm in there, 3.
So it really is.
You can't do it with one person.
You can.
It's
done.
Yeah, it happens. I work with 15, 20-person teams to make, they're a little more intense, but you can make the greatest game in the world with one person. We've seen it done.
So just for laymen, so let's say one person makes a game. How does one person deploy this game? What's the distribution model? How is profit generated?
What?
Oh, there you go. So one person makes a game, but doesn't necessarily make a living off it.
Yeah, some people are. You guys just went through this.
Sure. So Sleep Ninja Games, when we developed Monsters Ate My Birthday Cake, which is our previous mobile title, we essentially did it entirely in our spare time. Both of us were working full-time jobs at the time, and I ended up quitting my previous full-time job, taking a 3-month sort of sabbatical from work to work on it kind of full-time, and then actually had to take another full-time job again. So that was really a labor of love in our spare time, working kind of 80, 90-hour, possibly 100-hour weeks, in that kind of final period. And we've just finally transitioned to a point where we're sort of sustainable as a company, where we can just pay ourselves a full-time salary, quit our full-time jobs kind of thing. And having just gone to GDC and talked to a lot of other indie developers, what we found is that actually what most people are doing is they're supplementing it with contract work. So making profit off of a game is the hardest thing that you can possibly do. I've heard it compared to movies, although it's probably a little bit different in the sense that it's a very high-risk field where you can make 10 games and you sort of have to depend on one of them being a hit to fund the other 9. I personally really like Dan Cook. He has a blog post on this that actually recently went out in the last month. He talks a lot about the runway, which is sort of how much money you have left to make a hit game in, not to make your next game, but to make a successful game in. So sometimes it takes 3 or 5 or 10 games, and how well does that game have to do? So that's sort of how you reach financial stability, and what we found is for most people it's actually contract work on the side to fund their passion projects, which is what we're actually doing right now too. We had to take contract work to be able to become a full-time game development studio.
Contract work in the field of?
Sometimes in the field of game development, sometimes not. I've heard of plenty of people who take contract work in related fields, such
What would be a related?
Such as, for anybody who has artistic talent, just kind of graphic design, that's a really common one. For anyone who has music or sound talent, obviously that can be extended to a lot of things. But for programmers or designers specifically, I've seen a lot in visualization. So I know a lot of local companies do stuff for Nike and Adidas for kind of advertising type projects. So those have a lot of overlap because a lot of them are actually using Unity 3D as well. So that sort of answers the question of financial viability. But in terms of how to actually bring a product to market, that's such a wide and difficult to answer question that there's an entire conference devoted to it.
Let's turn to Nick for some insight in that.
Yeah.
Let's and actually, could you share with us the structure of your company and how you get the bread buttered and then toasted?
Right. Just in the last month or so, we've actually started making enough off of the games that we've put out to where we can start actually paying ourselves. But prior to that, I run a scoring studio that's kind of it's a part of Mountain Machine, but goes by a different name. And so my friend and I, we do music for commercials and that kind of thing. And that tended to be for quite a while what paid the rest of the guys. So we would, we'd get a bigger project and we would just put it all into Mountain Machine and then pay ourselves a slightly higher rate just for doing the work on it, but then the rest, everybody else would just be paid, a typical wage off of it. But and the other thing that really kickstarted it was, I mentioned it before, but we were in Oregon Storyboard, and so that's a state-run nonprofit accelerator that we were in, and Crystal is right back there if you have a company that you want to apply.
That's a hand for Oregon Storyboard.
Woo, Oregon Storyboard in the house.
So that gave us just enough capital to get through the 4-month thing, and we could actually quit everything that we were working on the sides and focus solely on getting that Mayday Deep Space game out and done. So it's been interesting. It's definitely what you said. We still have a couple contract side things that we work on here and there. Because you have to until you get that game that just catches. And if you're going for that all the time, I hate to say it, but you're going to be sorely disappointed. And I think just being realistic about it and love what you do. We seriously love making games and doing it, and we don't want to be doing anything else. And so, we're willing to sacrifice, living in mansions to make the games that we're making. So.
Oh yeah. And I can certainly appreciate following your passion. Games are my life's work. Totally. Right there with you, dude.
It's hard.
Now, but the question now becomes a financial one. So when you get that one-hit game, is that one-hit game enough to float the next 10?
Not for us.
So I don't have any personal experience with that, so I can't really say. But what I've heard is that it's enough to float between 3 to 10 from other developer friends who have had 6 hit games. That's kind of typically the runway. If you have a really huge hit, you'll fund 3 to 10 games. If you have a success, it's funded itself. And then most things don't hit either of those marks.
Gotcha. Is there a model for add-ons? You have hit number 1 and then hit the second edition, or the expansion pack, or the stretch goal, or...
So there was a really good GDC talk recently about the game developer Sarah, I'm getting her last name wrong, Conway, but she developed the Rebuild series, and she actually talked about indie sequels. Because sequels are one of those things that are sort of looked down on in the indie world, especially because indie is supposed to be unique and new and weird and different, and sequels are kind of the opposite of that. But she made a really good point that sequels, if you've had one successful game, a sequel is a really great way to build on top of that financial success, kind of reward your fans for giving them a new experience, and it really sort of extends that runway a lot more. It takes that one successful game and turns it into potentially 2 or 3, which can be huge for financial sustainability.
Gotcha. So we're going to continue on. We've been apparently burning more time than I thought talking about the logistics of what it takes to make a go of it in the game design industry.
Actually, before you go on, I want
yeah.
to talk a little bit about how you might actually make money.
Oh, hell yeah.
And because
this is OEN, right?
Yes.
Okay, good.
So I think there's 2 things. One is extending your runway. When I was getting my start, I got a really cheap sailboat, and I was able to live in LA for $250 a month because that was what it cost to tie the boat up. And really lowering your costs extends your runway massively. And if you have your whole team, not necessarily working on a crappy little sailboat, but you can have an office that's a little house that 5 people share for $250 a month, and there's your office and your place where you sleep, and you all work together and make that happen. That really massively extends your runway. And if you're all living on ramen, it's pretty easy to imagine not working all that hard to earn that much money to survive, so you don't really have to take on big contract work to make that happen. And the second part of this is we have this thing called crowdfunding, which we haven't really talked about, but is an enormous boon to game developers, where if you have something and you put it out there, the market will tell you, hey, this is a good idea. I'm willing to give you money right now, even though it's not finished, to make this a reality. And the sort of goal there is to get the game as far as you can so that people will say, yes, there's something really here. And there's some fantastic examples, both spectacular crash and burns and spectacular success in the crowdfunding world, and we don't really have time to talk about it, but it's something that really should be looked at. And the third thing that I want to say is the distribution platforms that exist today make it possible to put your game out there. Even if you don't have crowdfunding, it's gotten so much easier to get a game out on massive distribution networks. So we'll take Steam, which I believe has 100 million people who are subscribed. It's an enormous platform. You used to have to need, if you were to go through their greenlight process, which was sort of their way of vetting a game, you used to need something like 30,000 yes votes. Well, they've changed it now, and it's somewhere around 2,000. And, honestly, if your game isn't going to get 2,000 yes votes, you probably should move on to the next game. But what we're talking about here is a distribution platform that is massive that you can get onto quickly. They take speaking from someone who's dealt with publishers before, a very small percentage of what you're going to get at the end of the day, and allow you to publish immediately to an audience, build an audience, and get the next game going. And there's not just Steam. There's GOG and Desura and lots of other ones out there. And I think those distribution platforms, coupled with crowdfunding and just extending your runway as long as you can, make this really possible to do. It doesn't make it any less hard from, making games is quite hard. It's very hard. But from a financial perspective, everything is there for you, and the support networks are there, and all the distribution things are there. Whereas before, just a few years ago, you couldn't do that. You could not do that. And that's what's brought me back into the game industry, is these things. So.
Yeah, I wanted just to tag onto that real quick, because it's an indie perspective we're talking about, is self-funding and kickstarting. And I mean, obviously we don't have time to go into it, but there are 100 different ways to finance a game these days. There's still the old publisher model. They'll take a portion of your, a very large portion of your revenue in exchange for funding your game. And for a lot of people who just want to make a game, that's enough. Like, they have a dream to make a game. They had caught the eye of a publisher. The publisher wants to take 30-40%, which is insane, but it will keep them employed for several years. They get to make the game that they want alongside a publisher and make some sacrifices. And if the game does really well, they make a lot of money. Everyone makes a lot of money. So that model isn't dead. It's not preferred. Obviously, being able to hack it out for a year and a half in a house with your buds and make a game that's a hit, who wouldn't want that, right? But there's still publishers, there's still investors, there's still angels. It's a huge business with 100 different avenues for funding. We work with a company called Double Fine that did a game called Broken Age. And so what they wanted to do is they've been living on publisher funding for years. And so they had a few, they've never had a huge hit, but they've had semi-hits and they've done lots of contract games. And so they've spent years having a publisher fund one game and doing it on the cheap to fund another game, and it's just this endless juggle of tossing finances around. Are we running out of time here?
Yes,
Okay.
and I've got 2 questions to wrap it up before we do audience Q&A. All right, and we can do this first one quick, and we'll start with Brian.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, percentage-wise of your budget, how much do you devote to marketing to get the word out about your game?
Corey's better at answering that particular question.
Hey, Corey,
But
how much percentage-wise of your budget do you devote to marketing?
it's I think it's 20-something%. It's substantial. Yeah.
What we spend on marketing? We don't. We help other developers make games. So
Probably less than 1%, but we spend a lot more of that in time because that's all we can afford. So I would say probably about 10 to 20% of our time is spent reaching out to do marketing or going to events.
I would fall about 10% of my own personal time. So
Fantastic.
unpaid.
All right, and the wrap-up whammy question. Ready? So, the year is 2025. I have just hopped into my self-driving car. What game am I playing?
I know, right? Who wants to start? I think you're playing the game of life by being in that thing.
I don't need to see out the windows. I don't need to necessarily do work. What game am I playing? On my way to work. Maybe my commute is 20, maybe 30 minutes.
You have a choice of so many games, it's ridiculous.
Well, what game would you guys play on your way to work in your self-driving car?
I think it's going to be one of the augmented reality things down the road, like HoloLens. I see a bright future for that down the road, and so.
HoloLens in the car.
Oh yeah.
Booyah.
If I'm not driving it, yeah.
So one of my favorite early games was this game that was kind of, it wasn't actually, but the best metaphor is Second Life. If anybody's heard of Second Life, you basically user-generated content to build these virtual worlds, and then you just kind of walk around the virtual worlds, and there was some other additional stuff. But to me, something that's social with a lot of user-generated content, something like Minecraft was a really big hit, I think, for that reason. And I imagine it'll probably, by that point, it'll probably be something tied into one of the bigger social networks, maybe somehow tied into Facebook. Maybe Facebook will have gone away and there will be something else new. But an MMO with a lot of user-generated content that's tied into your social network.
Zelda.
Well played, sir. Well played.
I was going to say Pong.
Oh, with the HoloLens, that would be amazing.
Yeah. World of Pong.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks, everyone. We're going to open it up to Q&A right now. And do we have mics for Q&A? Oh, I got to walk around? All right. Little cardio in the day. All right. We're going to go with this gentleman first.
Hi. Just a question for Yuri about the community workshops.
So is that just to talk about them?
Community workshops.
Sure. So part of what was kind of written in my bio was that I do community workshops to sort of encourage people who are not yet game developers. So I'm part of a local group called the Portland Indie Game Squad, and that's sort of the community group that I referenced earlier that really allowed me to get my start. So one of my main missions is to empower people to create their own games. You know, we talked a lot here about anybody can make a game. It takes one person. So I really want to make that a reality in a lot of ways. So what I do is I run classes for kids with a local nonprofit called Pixel Arts, as well as a local nonprofit called Chick Tech. So I've done workshops for both of them to teach high school age girls, as well as library camps to teach them game development. And then I also do local free workshops in really accessible game development frameworks. One that's been making a lot of waves lately is the Twine framework, which is all about interactive fiction, so kind of like writing choose-your-own-adventure books. But Twine also has a lot of power behind it that a lot of people don't realize. So to me, it's just really important to give people the ability to express themselves through games, because I think that's sort of the next most important medium for people to express themselves in, and I just want to open that up to as many people as possible.
Yeah, I would like to add that the work that Yuri and Pixel Arts and Pig Squad are doing is I mean, angelic. It's incredible. These guys, do amazing work, and they do it all for free on their spare time, and I have the utmost respect for what you guys do.
Absolutely. Yes.
And if you want to see more about it, pigsquad.com.
First off, thank you guys very much for everything you've told us about today. I wanted to know specifically about Oregon, I guess Portland to some extent, but Eugene as well. What are you most hopeful for as far as the gaming industry is here, and what are you most nervous about? Probably the talent pool will come up most, but other things of that nature.
Talent pool is a concern. We formed a video game trade organization recently to help with that. Our goal is to make Portland and Oregon in general a healthy place for game companies. I'm most optimistic about the fact that games are going to be made in Portland, in Oregon, and that the perspective from Oregon is unique. Just like all pop culture is regional, right? New York makes different types of films than Hollywood. There's West Coast rap and East Coast rap, right? So games are no different, and so far we've only seen games being, for the most part, games have been sprouting up in Seattle and the Bay Area, and it's a bit homogenized at this point. Because they've been doing it forever. But as these regional players come into play, like Louisiana or Oregon, you just see a very unique perspective you haven't seen in games before. Fulbright, I think, made a very Oregon game called Gone Home. That was a huge hit. That was distinctly Oregon, and I think we're going to see a lot more games here, art forms in games that are distinctly Oregon, and I'm really excited about that.
I feel like there's a similar model in Austin, Texas, which is one of the foremost game development places in the United States. What Texas has done is give some enormous advantages to companies originating there, and if we can get the state behind us, I think we can have that same thing. That's the only thing that we lack is a really coherent incentive package, because I'm not prone to swinging cats, but you can't swing a cat in Portland without hitting someone who would be a fabulous part of a game development team. We have an enormous amount of talent here. We have everything we need. And we don't have to look very far than Eugene, which up until just a few years ago was really a hub for game development. There were some legendary studios going out of there. And I think Portland is a better place for it. And I'm excited to see that develop and hopeful that we can make that work here.
So I was just curious about what you guys think about the esports, and as developers, what do you feel about that? Should you aim for it, or do you just not care?
About what? What was the question?
Esports.
Esports. Oh, yeah.
We'd love to turn turn Change Wizard into an esport for sure. I mean, it's not kind of what I had said earlier. For us as a studio and our personalities, it's definitely not a passion of ours to make a game like that. But you know, you never know. It's definitely profitable if you can make one. But saying that, there's really only like 2 or 3 that are even recognized for it. And so the market is very, very difficult to go in that route. So.
I think honestly, if you don't have millions of dollars to spend on it, you won't turn your game into an esports game. I think unless you're, you know, League of Legends or Hearthstone or Dota 2, it's just kind of not going to happen. I mean, Counter-Strike was sort of a breakout in that regard a little bit, I feel like. I don't think you can try to be an esports game. I think it can either happen or you pump millions of dollars to make it that way.
Yeah, we made a game called Forge that no longer exists that accidentally became an esports game. Not huge. Any game can be an esports game. How big it is kind of depends on, you know, the whole bunch of other factors. But I think esports are going to just get bigger, you know? Thanks
ESPN for showing League of Legends.
Yeah, right. I mean, Twitch is a perfect example of that. Like, people like watching games now. They didn't used to like watching games, but now it's huge.
Yeah.
So yeah, esports I think is going to be
There's a weird generation of people loving to watch other people play games. I don't fall into that. I think
it could be worse. It could be much worse.
You think it's weird for you young guys? Like for us older guys, it's surreal. You know.
Yeah, you're so much older than me.
I had a question. So it's kind of a two-parter depending on your answer. Really quick, each of you, what are some development companies that you really respect or admire or have the most respect for what they've put out in their business models and everything, and why?
I'm gonna say actually I have a lot of respect for your company because you're doing really good stuff and
thank you.
The work that you're doing is really legendary. He wouldn't say it, but you're working on some legendary games and the talent on your team is amazing. So like I have a lot of respect for what you're doing. I don't know. I look to some sort of companies that actually do more than just make games. That they somehow push the envelope. So like kind of an old example would be id Software, where they like really advanced graphics technology. So someone who does more and actually advances things. So I like smaller things. Like pretty much my favorite game is Space Team, and it's a guy made by it's a game made by a guy by the name of Henry, and he's in Canada, and it's just an amazing game, and he's just a really cool guy. So, it's changed what I think about games. So,
yeah, I find Double Fine super inspiring. You go down there, and these guys have been doing this a long time. It's really, most people have been doing this around 20 years, are really jaded, and you walk into that place, and there's 50 people there, just like children. They're so excited about everything they're working on. And they've changed the model a bit where they're like a public company now. They come out to the public and say, hey, what do you want us to make? And you fund it. And they're moving in that direction. They've done that with 2 games so far on Kickstarter. I think it's a totally new model, this public-facing entertainment company that's based directly on what the public wants. I think they're on the way to doing just incredible things. But already you just walk into that place and the energy is inspiring. They're all like I said, like kids. They're all giddy and happy, and they love what they do. And you just, as a studio that works with them, it's the highlight of the day having a Skype with Double Fine, because they're all like, they love everything. It's amazing.
I'm a big fan of Double Fine as well. I mean, you've basically covered it. And then Capybara out of Canada, I think, does awesome work.
Incredible stuff.
And they consistently do new and interesting work, which is really impressive. I also love what you guys do at Super Genius. I mean, just I love just about any company that's filled with good people that manages to survive and pay those people. So I just love that. And then I really like all of the sort of smaller alt games and really tiny games and really just weird games that come out of people barely scraping by, kind of working in their spare time. Anybody's that's working their hardest to get their vision out there, I think is just doing amazing work.
Just for, to not repeat, but if you have not checked out what Super Genius does, like seriously, their art and animation work is amazing, and you would be doing yourself a favor by checking out what they've been working on. So, yeah. It's amazing work. All the Telltale games and Double Fine games that they've been working on are astounding. So I love all the indie stuff that they've been talking about too, like Cappy. I love their stuff. We base a lot of our artwork for the current game off of a lot of stuff that they are doing. But I have a handful of friends that work pretty deep in a couple AAA studios out of the Seattle area. And some of those, just as I've heard how they work internally, I'm really inspired by on that end of it, like as a larger business and how you do that. So like I have a few friends that work in Bungie, and I have a few friends that work at Valve, and it's Valve is like a weird anomaly. Like they're such a strange company, the way they're set up, where no one's a boss of anyone. You just kind of sign up for projects. But
they have enough money to do that.
Yeah, thanks to Steam. But Bungie's really interesting. Growing up playing games, I was really involved in their community because I loved Halo so much. And then it's been interesting watching them try this new game with Destiny, where it's like a shooter MMO, and just biffing it hard on everything right off the beginning. But them being surprisingly open to all the feedback from everybody, and then they just keep putting out updates every other month, and it changes, and it's falling more and more in line with what everybody was hoping it would be, and they've just been learning with the community, which is incredible. Like the fact that they're putting that time to correct and make it something that their community wants is impressive to me.
Is it getting better?
It's way better
awesome.
Now. Yeah, yeah.
It's collecting dust on my shelf.
Yeah, I took about a 4.5 month break. So, but.
All right, we've got room for one more question. Do we have a lucky taker? Wait.
So how do you guys feel about the collectability of games going forward now that everything is digital? Like you don't have the games on your shelf. It's sitting, on a server waiting for you to download.
It's hard. I mean, I feel like I've gone all digital. Like I just buy games digitally now, but it sucks when I'm like, well, I need a little extra money to buy this game. Like I can't really. It's like, well, I'll sell you a whole console with 6 games on it, but it's a totally different world. I think there's got to be a way. Wasn't Steam trying to do something where you could actually sell the key? I think you could sell the digital key to the game.
Sell the key? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Like used games.
Yeah.
Like Blue Key, Blue Door?
Yeah.
That type of thing.
Right, yeah.
But I think it's the nostalgia. I don't know if it's nostalgia. It's the collection mentality of having the thing, right? I'm not a collector, so I like the fact that everything's digital because every year I just would burn everything I own. I hate having things, so I like digital. But I know in Portland it's the wrong thing to say. But I know a lot of people
minimalist
who collect things, vinyl, toys, and whatnot, and that's probably it hurts, right? Like to not have those things, like to look at, and that's your collection. That's a part of your personality, and we don't have that in games anymore. And I don't, it doesn't bother me much, but I'm sure it bothers people like you who probably collect things, right? And that's a hit, hit to your culture.
I feel like there's two things. One is sort of like the DRM aspect, and I feel like once you buy a game, you own it, and you should be able to resell it. As a developer, I don't have a problem with someone reselling something that they paid for. I think that's fine. I don't feel like I'm owed anything by that, and I don't want to own anybody's sort of license or any of that. That just feels wrong to me. And because I think our nation has been founded on that idea of owning that. I don't want to change that. I like that. The collectability thing, I think, is somewhat being addressed through crowdfunding, and you're seeing, like, as higher level tiers, people offering physical rewards that include, like, really nice boxes and extra things and cool stuff, and so that desire, that demand is being filled, and I'm just glad that there's a way to fulfill that need out there, whether or not you're a collector of things or not. It's great to see that it's possible.
I think if you like stuff, you should check out the Indie Box. They're a company that takes indie games and they make collector's boxes out of them with toys and stickers and cloth maps and all the cool stuff you got from games of old. But also I think Kickstarter has filled that niche a lot, because nowadays so many games get Kickstarted and a lot of the rewards are those physical goods. And usually they're not a box anymore. They're usually a t-shirt, or they're a sticker or a vinyl figurine or whatever it is. So personally, I don't play games anymore. I just buy them to support creators. So I don't really mind games being all digital, because then they don't take up space. I barely have time to play games anymore. But you know, if you have that like feeling of wanting to own a game, like there are services I think that cater to that. And Indie Box gives you a DRM free copy on a USB stick. So you still kind of have that ownership feeling.
Okay, so with that, we'll wrap this panel up. So what did we learn today? Well, I think we learned beyond the shadow of a doubt, one person, that's it. That's all that it takes to build a game. This is facilitated by ease of access. There are a number of crutches that are at your disposal. Let's see, collectability is mitigated because collectability is down with the rise of digital access, but that's mitigated by Kickstarter. Kickstarter is an crowdfunding as a mechanism is an incredibly powerful tool for any single person who wants to build a game. And let's see, and if you're thinking about turning that one-person game studio into a reality, you should probably be exploring alternative work to float the company until you're able to get that one hit out of 3, 5, or 10 that will make or break you. Thank you, everyone.